14% said that they were filing on behalf of a Moms for Liberty chapter. Only 2 out of these thousands of challenges were filed by students. 2, not 2%, 2. And it's only happening in a couple of states in a big way. Texas, 32% of all the challenges. Florida, 17% of all the challenges. Missouri, 11% of the challenges. No other state is in double digits. The next state, number 4, is Pennsylvania with 5%. Everybody else is 1, 2, 3%, something like that. You know, it's just... This is a classic example of how a right-wing echo chamber combined with craven politicians who are willing to destroy the lives of young people who are, you know, gay, lesbian, trans, non-conforming, the LGBTQ community. They're absolutely willing to destroy the lives of these vulnerable people, among the most vulnerable in our society, for political gain. Pure and simple. To advance the interests of the neo-fascist Republican Party. What has become the neo-fascist Republican Party. Now down in Florida, I mean, they even got Amanda Gorman's poem banned. I mentioned this yesterday. Amanda Gorman was the young black woman who wrote this beautiful, beautiful poem about how, love can conquer hate, and, together we're going to work for a country that works for all. And these are my words, not hers. I don't have I was looking around for the poem this morning. I didn't quickly find it, and then the time caught up with me, and I had to go on the air. But the Miami-Dade School District has said, no. We've got one parent who objected to this. Because why? It was written by a black woman? It references the black struggle? I mean, this is what's going on. So, story number 1. Story number 2. The Republican Party loves them some election intimidators. This goes way, way back. Back in the 1960s, William Rehnquist, was a lawyer in Phoenix, Arizona, and a Republican activist. He was a big bear of a man. He was like 6'2", weighed a couple hundred pounds. I mean, Rehnquist was big. And he would stand outside polling places where there were large Hispanic or black or in particular Native American
no alcohol gin, no alcohol whiskey,
and this was back
no alcohol
before there were voter ID laws.
And there's a
like
bunch
that.
of drinks
and you could just challenge
that you can buy, and you can make your own cocktails.
And then they would have to go home and get, and come back and prove if they were challenged. So he would just stand there and he would challenge every single voter.
Although I have made gin and tonics with the no alcohol gin, so that's what I'm going to be drinking
would leave and
but
never come
I'm
back.
with you, Bob. Be safe.
There was a name for this. In fact, it was called Operation Eagle Eye.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Patrick
in East Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Who want to vote?
Oh, hi, Tom. I wanted to address basically what you were asking the Wayne State psychiatrist at the end of the interview, like, what do we do now? Because it was kind of a psychological focus, and the focus was cult members being convinced it was an insurrection and getting out of their cult leaders' control or grip.
Now they call themselves, instead of calling themselves Eagle Eye, now they call themselves election integrity
lawyer who was telling you about bail conditions. So I want to bring those two calls together. But really, this is about what Fox News would be doing if it was Thom Hartmann show. And what I think they would be doing is they would be saying Trump is ineligible to run for office. And the reason we know this is that, as you've reported, the 2 Federalist Society professors, William Baude at University of Chicago and Michael Paulson at University of St. Thomas, and the co-founder of the Federalist Society, Steve Calabrese, all say this is a no-brainer. This is pick and low proof. The question is, in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, did Trump commit an insurrection, any act to aid it, or rebellion, or language says aid or comfort people doing that.
It's not in the news.
Now,
you don't know.
the question is not whether he was engaged in an insurrection or whether he incited it. It's not the question. And the question is not whether he's an officer, because John Tyler was an officer, former president. He wasn't allowed to be serving in any Confederate government after the Civil War. John Breckinridge, Vice President, former Vice President, served in the Confederacy. He was knocked out. War debts. Treasury Department said, no, we're not financing your war debts because you put Confederates in all your state governments before Grant sent the Army in to take them back out, citing the 14th Amendment. The language is clear, the history is clear. So what would Fox News do if they were Thom Hartmann? They would do what Alan Morrison said. He was the dean of, he's now the dean of George Washington University Law School. And in the Hill, July 17th, he said, Democrats should sue to keep Trump off the ballot. Now, he's not an election specialist. I worked for him. He was a top lawyer for Nader. What they should do is what Ned Foley is saying, which is get the states to pass a statute and get the federal judge to issue bail conditions, and Trump would then be off the ballot immediately. He couldn't take federal funds. He's financing 30% of his defense.
I get it. I got to run, Patrick. Thank you.
And so they put
excellent points all. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. And be careful tonight with your drinking games, right?
Made it a crime to intimidate.
You don't need to be falling down on the floor here. Have a good time. We'll see you tomorrow. Get out there, get active. Tag, you're it. If I didn't say that, I think I did. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
And so, sure enough, Republicans in Florida,
at least since the invention of the wheel, people have fixed, tinkered with, and improved every device they've possessed. It's been a human right. But after several thousand years, suddenly legal clauses are being tucked in purchase agreements saying that today's owners of products must not even peek, much less poke inside the inner workings of our devices. Makers of anything with a computer chip in it, everything from your car to your toothbrush, have been especially vehement about this, rewriting human nature by outlawing our right to repair. Yes, they assert, you own the thing, but we own the intangible ideas that make it work. So if the product malfunctions, you must return it to us and pay us a premium to repair it. Plus,
it's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, what's going on with the GOP? Did you watch the debate last night? Or if you didn't, have you watched the clips and read the news reports this morning? It was amazing. Louise and I, well, you know, it's 2 hours of our lives we'll never get back, I guess is the best way to characterize it. It was grim. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, is Donald Trump to the Republican Party like a parasitic wasp to a caterpillar? I think last night's debate kind of indicated yes. We'll get into that in a moment. Donald Trump says he'll be proudly arrested in prime time after this dark debate, another dark day for America. In fact, in all probability, from the news reports I'm seeing, we won't see, like we saw with Rudy Giuliani yesterday, you know, the perp walk kind of thing, or at least the showing up at the court thing. That's not going to happen with Trump. The Secret Service will hustle him in. We're probably not even going to get a picture of it. To start the second hour of our program, Phil Ittner is going to drop by with a live report from what's going on in Ukraine and, you know, what's the latest buzz on the murder of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the mercenary leader of the Wagner Group. Also, in the second hour, will Leonard Leo's dark money network finally get exposed? In our third hour, two interesting stories. How scientists have proven a link between junk food and tumors. Why are young people getting cancer in record numbers? And also, the Bishop Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II is going to be with us for about a half hour this afternoon in the third hour of the program, talking about the extremists among the right wing and his work in civil rights over the years. This man is, in my mind, one of the real heroes of today's modern civil rights movement. So a lot to talk about. I'm going to get to my thoughts on the debate. Well, actually, this is all part of kind of one thing. Well, you know, when you look at the debate last night, what happened? There was climate denial, right? Oh no, global change, global climate change, it's a hoax, says Ramaswamy. You had, you know, everybody calling for abortion bans. People, it was just there was a lot of weird stuff that was not, I think, frankly, representative of America as a whole. And the audience, you know, clearly was, you know, filled with Trump humpers. So what's going on here? Robert Hubble yesterday in his Today's Edition newsletter on Substack made the point that Trump's relationship to the Republican Party is like one of those parasitic wasps that injects an egg into a caterpillar, and then as the egg hatches into a larva, the larva eats the caterpillar until there's nothing left but a husk. And then the wasp pupates and becomes a wasp. I'd like to take that metaphor a step further. There's a fungus called cordyceps that this fungus takes over an ant or ants and causes the ant to basically turn into a cordyceps spreading thing. You know, it works to the advantage of the fungus. There's also a parasite that cats have. It's called Toxoplasma. Toxoplasma gondii, actually, is the botanical name, or the Latin name. And Toxoplasma, when it infects mice, causes them to not only lose their fear of cats, but in some cases they want to play with cats. I think this is, you know, a better metaphor for what Donald Trump has done to the GOP. But then the larger question is, what was it about the Republican Party that allowed Donald Trump to take it over? As we saw last night in the debate, as we saw in all the hooping and hollering for Donald Trump from the audience. I mean, it's pretty impressive when you think about it. What he has done is worthy of cordyceps or toxoplasma. Donald Trump was a registered Democrat right up until he declared his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination. He was a major donor to the Democratic Party his entire life. He ran on Bernie Sanders' platform in 2016. He promised universal health care that was cheaper than Obamacare. He promised taxes so high on the morbidly rich that my friends won't talk to me. He said he was going to bring America's factories back from overseas. He pledged to strengthen and expand Social Security and Medicare. Now, all of those were lies, but the Republican base bought it. I mean, it was, like I said, it was Bernie's agenda. The Republican base bought it, and many of them to this day believe what he said. In fact, many of them believe that he actually did those things, which I guess, you know, is a statement about the popularity of
Bernie. Where did this come from? Well, Trump is no idiot. He saw how the GOP had been, essentially weakened by, number one, Nixon's lies, right? Nixon blew up in 1968. Nixon reached out to South Vietnam, and said, don't show up for the peace talks, or actually don't show up to sign the peace agreement that LBJ had negotiated that summer. So Nixon, number one, and then, of course, Nixon being evicted from office. Then Reagan committing treason, cutting a deal with the Ayatollah to hold the hostages. And then Reaganomics gutting the American middle class over a 40-year period. And then Bush and Cheney lying us into a war, 2 wars actually, that were completely unnecessary and illegal, that led to over 7,000 American deaths, $5 trillion in American debt. So the Republican Party was already in a badly weakened state. And then, Trump just walks in with Bernie's agenda and essentially takes it over. So I think that, and I could go through all the lies that the Republicans have been primed for. Nixon's secret plan to take care of Vietnam. Reagan convincing Americans that if we just cut the top tax rate on billionaires, all that wealth and all that prosperity is going to trickle down to all the rest of us. It trickled down all right. When he cut the top tax rate from 74 to 27%, all of a sudden the right-wing billionaires are buying radio and TV stations, newspapers, yachts, mansions, even spaceships now, right? He told Republicans that if they stopped enforcing the antitrust laws, we would make American business prosper. In fact, the average American family right now pays $5,000 a year more than families in Canada or Europe for the same goods because of the monopolies in America. He sold Republicans on the idea of free trade, Reagan did. I mean, he promised us, if we just followed Milton Friedman's advice and did away with support for housing, that everything would be wonderful. Instead, foreign investors came in and massive hedge funds, and now, we've got homelessness in tent cities. Reagan said if we just ended oppressive regulations, things would get great. Instead, we've got a food supply filled with chemicals, microplastics, and heavily processed faux foods. And, it goes on. I mean, George W. Bush lying us into the war, et cetera. So my premise here, and, that I'm laying out in this piece, is that the Republican Party has not actually been a legitimate political party, arguably since Reagan. The party of Eisenhower is dead, essentially. Long live the party of Eisenhower, right? So then the question becomes, what happens? How do we bring it back, this husk that Donald Trump has left behind? Well, first off, Donald Trump has to be moved off stage. Hopefully, these indictments will speed that process up. But then secondly, the Republican Party needs to recover. It needs to come back. We have to have a two-party system in this country. And one of those parties should not be a corrupt criminal organization. So all that said, back to the debate, and, then I'll toss it to y'all, and get your thoughts here on what you saw in the debate last night and where you think the Republican Party is going. 6 of the 8 Republicans said that if Trump is elected or is the nominee, that they would support him. Chris Christie said no, and Asa Hutchinson said no. When Christie looked directly into the camera and said about Donald Trump, he said, someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct. The crowd booed him. This is, the Wasp has taken over the caterpillar. He says, whether or not you believe that the criminal charges are right or wrong, the conduct is beneath the office of the President of the United States. Now, interestingly, as this was going on, there's this company called Navigator, and they do polling. And the senior director of polling, Brian Bennett, was live tweeting this last night. They're polling. And what was really interesting was when Chris Christie went after Donald Trump, 90% of the independent women and 80% of independents overall increased their opinion of Chris Christie. Same thing happened when Asa Hutchinson said that Trump was morally disqualified from running for president.
On the other hand, when Ramaswamy said Trump was the best president of the 21st century, the Republicans in the audience went nuts. They loved it. But the independents that were being lifetime polled said no. The support for this guy dropped below 30%. Nikki Haley. Frankly, I think the two people who won the election, who won the debate last night, were Nikki Haley and Chris Christie. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Nikki Haley said we have to face the fact that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. On foreign policy, Ramaswamy was like, screw Ukraine, basically. And Ramaswamy is a weird cat. I mean, this is a multimillionaire businessman, and his pitch was pure right-wing fossil fuel billionaire. I mean, the Koch brothers and all these other right-wing fossil fuel billionaires, and multimillionaires, they had to be smiling ear to ear last night. Ramaswamy saying that climate change is a hoax, that Trump was the best president in history, that we need to gut all of the federal agencies, end all the federal agencies. What would that do? Well, if our government shrank in those ways, you would see the income tax go down, and billionaires would have to pay less taxes. I mean, this is I believe their rationale. Although the average American billionaire right now is only paying 3.4% income taxes. Joy Reid, after the debate, she said Ramaswamy is your annoying college roommate. Chris Christie called him Chat GPT. He said he sounds like Chat GPT. That was one of the high moments of the evening. But Nikki Haley just called him out, and she called him out on his love of Putin and his unwillingness to support Ukraine. And I thought that was actually a positive moment in the debate. So anyhow, we'll pick up your calls here on the other side of the break. What say you about all this? It's 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with your calls, 18 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
He walks again by night, out of the fog into the smog.
Are you talking about Trump?
Sure, or the entire GOP constituency. Tom,
there's zombies.
The way oh my God, yeah, like you said, it's actually a Firesign Theater reference.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. I remember. It was. I don't remember which album that was from, though. That was not from Waiting for the Electrician.
Nick Danger.
Nick Danger. There you go. Third Eye. Yep.
Might have been.
Yeah.
And Nick. Yeah. All right. So my analysis here is that the GOP debate was less a debate, more a Coliseum gladiator bloodbath of throwing the lines to the Christians. Within 5 minutes, my GOP lies bingo card was full. Pence seemed to have a Mitch McConnell moment there for a while towards the end, then said, oh yeah, I did my job and prevented a despotic monarchy. Ronnie pretended to be a SEAL by my count 3 times. Vivek Ramaswamy and Esquire and all did everything but finger guns to the crowd. Asa Hutchin may have said something, or maybe it was Doug Burgum, I don't know. The moderators asked about climate change. Nearly all of the debaters simultaneously shrugged their shoulders and said nothing.
Right. Well, they got to keep the fossil fuel money coming,
Yep. Tim Scott said the nation was founded on Judeo-Christian ideas, proving that Tim Scott has no idea who the founders are.
Yep.
At one point, the moderator, Brett Baer, asked all involved to play within the rules, completely ignoring that faux noise. Fox News created this mob. And the most confounding takeaway from the night was that Chris Christie almost seemed cogent. And that's my takeaway, that Chris Christie could have been the nominee and Nikki Haley could have been the vice nom, but the party elephant in the room took his classified toys and went home.
Yeah. It's interesting. Chris Christie and Nikki Haley would actually make, I think, a formidable ticket.
but we'll never know, will we?
Well, I'm not sure. It's entirely possible that Trump is going to fail here.
But Tom, by the time they realize it will be too late. Biden will have the momentum.
I mean,
it's Biden's race to lose.
Yeah, but the primary actual election isn't for almost another year. I mean, there's a lot of time here. It's what, 8 or 9 months until the primary election?
I just, so long as Trump keeps going the direction he's going, I mean, let him campaign from jail, and maybe at some point his followers will go, oh, wait a second. Yeah. Any other circumstances, we'd be out of luck. We'd be up the creek.
Yeah. The weird thing about all this is that the understanding of Trump's crimes, it clearly has not set in. And now that Trump has dissed Fox, is Fox going to start educating people? Because, Fox is the agency, as it were, that got Trump all this support. I think that they can take it away. I think what Rupert Murdoch gives, he can take away. I think he's waiting in the sidelines for, frankly, Glenn Youngkin. He's already come out and said Glenn Youngkin.
I feel like I predicted this like 3 or 4 years ago, that eventually the GOP was just going to have to implode on itself.
Yeah, and that's the last paragraph of my article today is, it can't happen soon enough, but that's what's going to happen is the Democrats will mop the floor with them in 2024, and that will bring, that'll be their come to Jesus moment. Chaz, thanks for the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist, but we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls, your thoughts on what happened last night and all things GOP. Matthew in Oak Parks, California. Matthew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was just following through on what's going to happen, I think, with the trials. The debate was really weak last night, but the trials, I think Trump's going to get convicted. He's going to fly to Saudi Arabia because he's going to get sentenced to jail. And I want to know what happens when he goes to Saudi Arabia, because that's where he's going to go.
Or Oman. That's where they're building this.
Has to go with him.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Secret Service is going to go with him.
Yeah. I don't think they would, but God only knows. I mean, he just cut a deal, $1 billion deal with Oman to build a Trump hotel in Oman. So he may end up there. He made a joke the other day about going to Russia. I don't think that's going to happen.
No, he won't go to Russia because that's too dangerous. But he'll go to Saudi Arabia where he'll be treated like a king. Because he's got the king in his pocket, and the king has him in his pocket.
That's true.
And I don't think he'll go to jail. He's going to flee. He's got the jet, and they didn't take his passport. Not that he needs a passport anyway, because the king will let him into the kingdom, no problem, even without a passport. And we have no extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that's where it's headed.
Okay.
It'll take time, but he will get convicted and sentenced to jail, and he won't go to a state prison in Georgia.
Okay.
So he's not going to he's going to flee.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see. Matthew, thank you. John in Phoenix. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, good morning. Hey, when you're talking about how can we clean up the GOP party, I just saw breaking news. I think Jack Smith is all over it. He's indicting every single GOP that has supported Trump.
Jack Smith is. He hasn't indicted every one. I mean, he hasn't even, actually the only person Jack Smith has indicted is Donald Trump. Fani Willis indicted 17 other people. Or 18 other people.
I'm telling you what just came out just now. Breaking news. Looks like Special Counsel Jack Smith is going to indict all the GOP members that have been involved with Trump.
Really? Where'd you see this? Hello? Oh, he just hung up. Okay. I haven't seen that. And I just took a quick look at the Washington Post, and you would think that if that was the case, it would be at the very top. And instead, it's all about the debate about Prigozhin. So, we'll see. I think Jack Smith, though, is probably onto something. We'll see where it goes. But I believe that he didn't indict anybody along with Trump because he wants the Trump trial to happen quickly so that before the elections. But that doesn't prevent him from doing as Fani Willis did, all of Trump's co-conspirators. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back with you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Hey, welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. By the way, if you tried to call in a little bit ago and you just got silence, our phone system went a little nuts for a short while. I think we've got it under control now. In fact, I see a call coming in right this moment. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Before I get to the topic, I just want to mention that on my site, endbribes.com, I've listed 3 of the suggestions from yesterday, and they're featured on there today. And I just want to let people know I'm getting to all of them as quickly as I can, but this summer I've been quite busy with my grandchildren, and so that's kind of slowed me down a little bit on that. So I'm working on them.
That's
okay?
sweet. What are the 3 that you've got up there now?
Okay, say it loud. I'm woke and I'm proud. It's my party, and I'll lie if I want to. Homeland Security, fighting terrorism since 1492. And what I have there is a photograph of Native Americans, doing Homeland Security.
Cute.
So.
It's interesting you mentioned woke. The word only came up once in the entire debate last night. Nikki Haley mentioned it in passing it. You know, that word has not been polling well for Republicans. It looks to me like they're giving up on it.
No, it's one of my favorite words, and I love using it. And I understand from surveys I've seen that people who are woke are enjoying saying I'm woke. And I think that's really good. I like that word.
Yeah.
And also, when you talk about the debates, that's why I called. I used to like watching the debates. And I may not have always agreed, but I could learn something from it, and I would find it interesting.
Right.
I did not watch last night's debate. I listened to it, parts of it afterwards, and I'm even more glad because I don't think I would have learned anything from it. To me, it's now just in TV. Reality TV is really all it is, and I never cared for reality TV.
Yeah.
And I'm almost kind of disappointed because I'm not getting any educational value from the debates anymore.
What I think you would have learned from it is that the wasp egg has hatched inside the caterpillar and eaten about a third of the caterpillar. The caterpillar is not yet dead. It is not yet a husk. It is kind of twitching and moaning, but its death is imminent. Okay. Well, Ziggy, thank you for your thoughts.
I want to give you that point. And also, I saw the Barbie movie. It was a great idea. It really is a psychological adventure.
It really is. It's a marvelous movie. And I truly believe it's changing American culture. But
I agree. People should see it. It's not a kid's movie. All right, Tom, I'll let you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Ziggy. Rich in Indianapolis. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you very much. I was fortunate enough to hear Joe Madison talking about the Trump, the Republican Party, and he just said it flat out that it's a cult.
Yeah,
and he was able to explain that in a way that really made sense to me. Being here in Indiana, he said this was like Jim Jones.
Oh yeah,
and
I agree.
He cited some statements that were as recorded bits of Jim Jones saying, "They're doing this to me. They're coming for me. You need to do this for me."
Right.
And this is exactly what Donald Trump had said.
Yeah.
Remember that the People's Church started in Indiana before it went off to California. That was
and then went to Guyana.
in Indiana.
Yeah.
Well, there's an acronym to define the structures of cult. The acronym is BITE, to help people remember. B, behavior control. I, information control. T, thought control. This is like doctrine, us versus them. And then finally, emotional control. I tell you what to like. I tell you what to dislike. I incite you to act. For me, the glorious leader. And what we have is toxic authority monsters that people are clamoring to be a part of and to be close to as, the way to become safe, because they don't have a brain left in their head. They were never taught how to think. And I've said this a couple of times, and it's been having me catch some heat. But the way Catholicism is practiced here in Indiana, it is toxic so often. It is clericalism. It is giving absolute authority to this group that is betraying.
Yeah, I don't think this is unique to Catholicism. I think this problem is sweeping across right-wing Christianity. It really and truly is. But excellent points, Rich. Thank you very much for calling and making them. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Well, I think what's on my mind is, and it's been for a while, is that Vice President Pence may have done the right thing on January 6th, but then after that, he kept quiet. He wouldn't go to any of the hearings. He wouldn't tell the truth about what he knew, and now he's out there touting, what a good thing he did. But he never stood up for the people afterwards. He still protected Trump.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you had 4 years of Mike Pence being a complete suck-up and sycophant and going along with, separating mothers from their children at the border and, denying climate change and
and all the brutal policies of the Trump administration, the wink, wink, nod, nod, racism and hate. And then, you know, at the last minute, he says, okay, I can't break the law and give you the presidency for another 4 years. And suddenly he's a saint. No, you're absolutely right.
He's a coward.
Yeah, he's not a saint. He had one moment. He had a moment of strength. God bless him. I mean, you know, you could argue that Mike Pence saved the republic. I think that might be a slight exaggeration, but not totally. But it is not worth making him president over. I'm with you. Denise, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. Nick in Hemet, California. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today? Nick, your phone is fading in and out. I don't know if you can do anything about that, or I'll put you on hold and you can work it out.
How about this then?
Okay, now I can hear you. Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, I heard you talking about that book, Bright and Shining, something, that preacher. I've been a street preacher for 50 years, and I just wanted to straighten that out about, you know, this whole idea of give your life to Jesus and all this stuff that you were saying. Mm-hmm. You know, I've told people for half a century what that means is your troubles, your worries, your problems, you give those up to an almighty, probably invisible to you, you know, not understanding God exists. It's called faith.
What does this have to do with politics?
Oh, well, I heard you when you opened the show talking about some book that somebody's written about a preacher that was preaching on the, you know, yelling about Christmas.
No, it wasn't. Oh, you're talking about the book report we were reading. I can't speak to that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. But Nick, thanks for the call. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, are you getting better?
Is what getting better?
You.
I'm not.
Are you getting better?
Bad to begin with.
Anyway, it was an allusion to your father or grandfather. Anyway, the question that I have to everyone, including you, Tom, is if the Republican Party, you know, implodes, then what's going to happen with this right-wing, left-wing political panorama of this country? Is it going to be a two-party system still where the right wing becomes a Democratic party, or is there going to be a new right-wing party? What's going to happen after that?
We see these shifts in the Overton window, John, and I think that all of this has to be considered in the context of that. You know, to give a very serious answer to a very reasonable question. We had in the 1960s, for example, with the exception of the Vietnam War stuff, you had a very progressive Democratic Party and a Republican Party that was still in the echo of Eisenhower, was still, you know, actually fairly progressive. Eisenhower built schools and hospitals, built highway systems, raised Social Security benefits, expanded Social Security, let more people into it, raised the minimum wage, expanded union rights. He was a Republican president, and you had the echo of that. And then, you know, over when Reagan became president and the right-wing billionaires and the fossil fuel interests basically took over the Republican Party, you saw the Republican Party shift way to the right. And the Democratic Party came along with them to a large extent. Bill Clinton adopted Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism. Barack Obama maintained Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism, although, you know, he tried to do something for health care, but he wanted to do it using the so-called free market, in other words, big insurance companies. I think that what's happened now, and as the Democratic Party shifted to the right, then the Republican Party shifted even further to right, as the whole Overton window kind of just shifted harder and harder and harder to the right, to the point where the Democratic Party you know, I would say by 2005, the Democratic Party was basically where the Republican Party was in 1965. Now I think that with Joe Biden, what's happened is that the Overton window is shifting back to the left. The Democratic Party is moving to the left. The Republican Party, or at least is setting aside the Trump base, much of the Republican Party, the kind of Chris Christie Republican Party, is starting to move back to the left, or back to what arguably you could call the center. And I think that, you know, if you think of the whole thing in terms of the Overton window, with the Overton window being, you know, what are the upper and lower, left and right limits of acceptable, polite public discourse, political debate. My sense of it is that the entire Overton window is shifting to the left. And if you put this in the context of the fourth turning,
and this book by Neil Howe that just came out, The Fourth Turning Is Here. What he's arguing essentially, or my take on what he's arguing, is that the Overton window began to shift to the right hard 40 years ago with the election of Reagan. It started to shift hard to the left 80 years ago with the election of FDR, and thus we get these 80-year cycles. And now we're in the shifting back to the left cycle, that was the same one we had in the 1930s.
I'm hearing the possibility is very great that we're just going to keep repeating the same thing and hoping for a different outcome.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because times change and circumstances change. But I think this shift between the left and the right is going to continue, and I think, frankly, it always has. I think, you know, I recommend that you read The Fourth Turning, because he goes back to the 1600s and shows how this political shift, left to right, left to right, left to right, has been going on for basically forever in these 4-generation cycles. I think there's something to it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 46 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls, your thoughts on last night's debate, and where the GOP is going from here. Stay with us. And welcome back. Selassie in Venice Beach, California. Am I saying your name right?
Oh, yeah. How you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Selassie.
As in highly, right?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I knew you would know that. But yeah. But yeah. So yeah, you know, I just wanted to say, as a black man in America, you know, I'm very scared of, like, how everything is going, because, like, in my community, you know, you can go down for the smallest thing. And then, like, on the large scale, like the president, like, he can just get away with doing so much dirt and, like, just destroying the country. And, like, on the ground up, it's really scary. Like, I watched the debate last night. I like Chris Christie. I like how he's a straight shooter. He's done some things wrong. Everybody's done some things wrong. But I did Chris Christie. I like Nikki Haley. But, you know, I think that Trump's just going to blow him out the water, because this America right now is like straight tribalism. It's like... Yeah. It's like going back to ancient Rome. You know, like, it is bad.
Yeah.
It is bad. And so, like, from the ground up, from, like, seeing homeless people on Hollywood Boulevard every day, you know, having police harass people for nothing, and then you see the person with the highest office that should not be in any conversation about being president, but on my hunch, he might win.
Donald Trump?
You know, he might... Donald Trump, yes.
I don't think so. I think he has lost independence. I think if the Republicans nominate him, it's going to be a bloodbath. It's absolutely going to lose. The GOP is going to lose massively, both nationally and locally. And I think Republicans know that. And
you have a great point.
Yeah, and the question.
Have a great point. I heard you say that earlier. I don't know if he'll win the general, like you said, but he might still cause a lot of chaos.
That's the problem.
Up until the 8-9 months.
That's the danger, is, you know, how much damage that Donald Trump can do to America as a candidate. You know, as long as he has a public stage, as long as he's got a platform where the media feels like they really have no choice but to cover him. And of course, you know, you've also got the parasitic media, the media that just kind of lives off him, the OAN and Newsmax and Fox News and whatnot. But, you know, keep an eye on what Fox News does. I think that, you know, Trump's betrayal of them last night, his going with Tucker Carlson on X, on Twitter, all that kind of stuff, I think this is going to boomerang. I don't think that this is going to turn out well for them. And, I mean, we'll...
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, last thing, very briefly, Tom, thank you for your time, for letting me speak. Do you think that, like, his followers, Donald Trump, they'll, like, kidnap him and take him and not kidnap him, but, like, what, you know, like, protect him, you know, like
well, he's got the Secret Service to do that, you know. I don't think that it's, my sense of it is that if Donald Trump thinks that there's a really good chance that he's going to end up in prison, he will hop on his plane and flee the country. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And that, you know, in the Middle East, he will find plenty of people who are more than happy to take him in because of all the intelligence and secrets and documents and whatnot he shared with them during his presidency. I mean, he really betrayed the country in a big way during his presidency.
And you know what the ultimate betrayal is? They'll let him fly off of the runway straight to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Nobody will stop him. You know what I mean? So thank you for taking my call, Brother Tom. Thank you for the work you do.
Yeah, thank you, Selassie. Good to hear from you, and thanks for listening to KPFK. Yeah, you know, I was in Uganda when Idi Amin went to Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis gave him a palace for him and his 20-some-odd wives, and he lived there until the day he died as a man of luxury and leisure. Most Americans don't even know that. I could see Donald Trump doing the same. We'll be back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Kark in, am I saying that right? C-A-R-K? In Joliet?
No, Carl, K-A-R-L.
Oh, Carl, I'm sorry. Typo here. All good, Carl. That's my father's name. It's a great name. What's on your mind?
Cool. Chris Christie, I have a contrarian view of him compared to what seems to be the consensus about him winning the debate and, kind of siding with some Democratic points. I mean, those are... His shtick so far is just words, which can easily be walked back. If you notice, Tom, you might have to look close and review the video. When posed the question by the commentator, will you support Donald Trump if he's convicted and becomes the nominee? He was one of those. He was second to last to respond, and he raised his hand up in the air about halfway.
That's right.
That he would support Donald Trump.
And he later said that he meant to be making a no way motion with his hand instead of a yes motion.
Who said that?
Chris Christie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Real good excuse there.
Yeah, exactly.
To me, it looked like body language.
He was trying to have it both ways.
Overruling words. I don't trust the guy.
I don't either.
He was involved in the Bridgegate in New Jersey. Also, the way he followed around Trump, kind of like a puppy dog in 2016.
Yep, until he got COVID.
I could see him walking back the words and getting behind Trump if he's the nominee.
Yeah, he's one of those lick your finger and figure out which way the wind is blowing politicians.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I had a question, Tom, a quick question. What if Trump does win the nomination and becomes elected president and he's in jail? How does that work with running the country and Secret Service, et cetera?
Well, first off, it ain't going to happen. I doubt that Donald Trump is going to end up in jail, but we'll see. I mean, I think it would be the optimal outcome. But it's going to be years. I mean, there's even if he's convicted before the election, there's still an appeal process. So I'm guessing that Donald Trump is going to die of old age before he goes to prison. Then the question becomes, if he's elected, first of all, if he's the Republican nominee, and that's an if. And then secondly, if he gets elected, I don't think that there's any way he can get elected. He's lost independence. Democrats hate him. And the Republican base has shrunk by about 10-15% since his presidency. I mean, people are just fleeing. So I just don't see it happening, Carl. But if he were elected president, it would be the end of the republic. He would turn us into a Putin-style oligarchy, a dictatorship. You know, just like Orban has in Hungary. That. Yeah, and in fact, he's said as much. You know, he called for ending the Constitution. You know, this is what Mike Pence or Chris Christie kept pointing out last night. Donald Trump called to end the Constitution. People should realize that. Carl, thanks for the call. It was a good one. Peter in Chicago. Hey, Peter, what's on your mind?
I missed the debate. I don't have access right now, and I wouldn't have watched it anyway. But I read about it, and it seems that DeSantis is really psychotic.
I think he was the big loser last night. He looked like a robot. I mean, he was angry. He was the guy has no skills.
Oh yeah, I've heard. I've seen him on television before. He sounded crazy before too.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about Trump's last appointment to the Supreme Court. I know they don't have qualifications or ethics, it seems, but is Barrett qualified in any way?
Well, she was, you know, she's a law school graduate, and she was a judge for a short period of time. I would say that she wasn't qualified for the Supreme Court, but that's just me. You know, time will tell.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I think one of the big clues is that when she was an appeals court judge, she recused herself from cases that had to do with the fossil fuel industry because her father was a Shell Oil lawyer for 50 years or 40 years or whatever. Now that she's on the Supreme Court, in other words, she acted ethically. Now that she's on the Supreme Court, she does not recuse herself from those cases. In other words, now that she has this ultimate lifetime appointment power, she no longer feels the need to behave ethically, and that tells me that she's not a qualified person, that she's not a genuinely moral, you know, follow the rules kind of person. But, you know, we'll see. Peter, thank you for the call. We'll be right back with, we're going to talk to Phil Ittner from Ukraine, and then I'll get back to your calls so we can continue this conversation. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily TakeHartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program, and on the line with us is our buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent who's now based in Kyiv, Ukraine. You can follow his video blog on YouTube by knowing his name and how to spell it correctly. It's 6 letters each name, Philip, P-H-I-L-I-P, Ittner, I-T-T-N-E-R. On Twitter, or X, it's the reverse of that. It's Ittner Philip. His old account got hacked, so if you had been following him, you want to follow the new one, Ittner Philip. Phil, welcome back to the program. Looks to me like you're wearing what is that shirt called? It's a Ukrainian.
I am in observation of Ukrainian Independence Day, August 24th. I am wearing traditional embroidered Ukrainian clothing called the Vyshyvanka.
Vyshyvanka.
The Vyshyvanka, and this particular one has the trident on it. I don't know if you can see that there. There we go, the trident. But it's a lovely day. People are out enjoying the sunshine. They have lined up along the main street in the capital tanks and artillery and weapons of war that the Russians will not be leaving with. Their hulks, their carcasses, defeated by Ukrainian forces. But it just reminds people that there are those who would wish to steal the independence away from the Ukrainian people. And from what I saw on the street today, that's going to be a hard task, because these people are fiercely proud of being free and being independent, and that's what today has been all about.
There you go. Obviously the big news right now is the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. I'm reading that there is speculation that his plane was taken down by a Russian army surface-to-air missile. Do you have any further information on that? And what do you think will be the consequence or the import of this event?
Well, you know, is so typical with Prigozhin. This is surrounded in mystery and shadow and a lot of questions. It does look as though a plane upon which he was on the manifest was shot down or brought down from an explosion outside of the city of Tver, which is a military base. Tver is one of Russia's primary military centers. So it could have been anti-aircraft. But of course, in order to do that, somebody very high up would have had to authorize that. It could have been Putin himself. But also, given the history of Prigozhin and his animosity towards, for example, Minister of Defense Shoigu, that is also a possibility. But again, as is so common with Prigozhin, a lot of this stuff is it's so rife for conspiracy theories, because we don't know exactly what happened. As a matter of fact, at this moment, Tom, we don't have confirmation that he's dead. I mean, there's a preponderance of evidence that he has been killed. That is even an accepted narrative by the Russian authorities. But, we also know that Prigozhin is a guy who experimented with, disguises and false identities. And this is the type of person who would be, liable to fake his own death. Not saying that has happened, but a lot of this is in shadow and in question. Because of those questions, I think it's going to be rife for conspiracy theory. But the important thing, Tom, is one way or the other, Prigozhin is off the stage. He is no longer a factor when it comes to the Ukrainian war or indeed power politics within Russia. I do not think, however, he will be the last casualty.
Yeah, well, I totally get that. Is this now the Wagner Group was operating in Ukraine and then they moved to Belarus. They're also operating in at least one African country and in Syria, if I'm recalling correctly, maybe Libya. So I saw a report last night that suggested that much of the Wagner Group is not hierarchical top-down. It's more lateral. It's it's more like individual cells. Like the old Communist Party in the 1930s. How is it organized, and what would his death mean for the future of the Wagner Group? Or will Putin just, scoop it up and either reinvent it as another mercenary army, military force, or legitimize it as part of the Russian military?
Well, there was the effort to draw Wagner into the regular Russian military structure, and that was a major part of the falling out that Prigozhin had with the rest of the power structure and with the rest of the kind of military that have been fighting here in Ukraine. He did structure it. Prigozhin had Wagner structured so that there was more of almost like an NCO class, which is not how the Russian military is set up. The Russian military is set up with a vast amount of conscripts, like enlisted men, and then a few, a couple of kind of middle grade officers, but mostly it's either you're at the top of the military grade or you're a conscript. Wagner wasn't like that. And so it engendered a lot of loyalty from the people that he brought into Wagner. He also went to prisons. That was a pretty shocking development at the beginning of the war here. He went to prison facilities and recruited, rapists and murderers and, promising them their freedom if they came and fought in Ukraine. So again, another reason why some people within Wagner had this loyalty for Prigozhin. So you ask, what now for Wagner post? Not only was Prigozhin on that plane, presumably, or on the manifest, but so was his primary commander, which is this guy Utkin, Dmitry Utkin, who was a straight up Nazi. The guy had swastikas and SS tattoos all over his body, and he also, he didn't just talk the talk; he walked the walk. He was a vicious, vile human being, as was Prigozhin. The esprit de corps within Wagner is brutal. There are reports of people when they tried to run away from the front lines within Wagner, they were caught and killed with a sledgehammer to the skull. This was an awful organization, and Prigozhin set that standard. He was a horrible human being. I wish death on nobody, but the world is a better place without him. Yeah. He got his start in the criminal organizations in St. Petersburg, which is where he met Putin. He was kind of Putin's thug. His kind of attack dog. His enforcer. He was prominent within the Internet Research Agency, which was responsible for a lot of cyber attacks, not least of which within the election of 2016 in America. This is a bad guy, and the Wagner organization is a bad organization. What is the future for Wagner? More likely than not, it will be brought into the fold of the Russian military, one way or the other. You mentioned all the places around the world in which Wagner was active, not least of which within Africa. Libya, they kind of got kicked out of. In Syria, it's interesting, the story of Wagner, because that's where Wagner went toe-to-toe with American forces, because they tried to take an oil field. And there was a U.S. Special Forces unit there, and they called in air support and artillery and drones, and the Wagner soldiers that were on the ground in Syria got really shellacked. And so there's that. But, you know, they also were effective in Bakhmut here in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have no love for Prigozhin or Wagner because they're brutal. The way they fight on the ground here in Ukraine has been absolutely disgusting and tragic. So, you know, on Independence Day, you know, there are those who are raising a glass to the demise of Prigozhin. But we will have to see what happens, not only with Wagner, but also the power structure, you know, between people inside Russia. This is another example of how Russia's center of gravity can no longer hold. This kind of, you know, shooting down a plane, if it was indeed shot down, or an explosion internally.
Putting a bomb on it.
You know, this
doesn't this strengthen Putin?
Things
though?
are not stable.
Yeah, Phil, doesn't this strengthen Putin? Doesn't this say to all of the other oligarchs and any other wannabe and the small handful of military officials who were trash talking Putin around Ukraine, you're next. Look out. Fall into line.
If it was Putin that did this. Well, keep in mind that that Prigozhin had a lot of enemies within, you know, the power structure. You know, it could have been a situation of who will rid me of this meddlesome priest, you know, sort of thing, and somebody took it upon themselves, or somebody who had a beef directly with Prigozhin, because as we've discussed in the past, I think there's this conflict happening within the power elite because there is a lot of instability growing in Russia, and the future is not secured, and so people are trying to jockey for position. If it was indeed Putin, you're right, it does kind of strengthen his hand, but it makes you wonder, why did he wait 2 months? You know, there must have been some sort of usefulness that Prigozhin gave to Putin in the interim. It was Putin who ordered his death.
Yeah, and as long as nobody knows for sure who killed him, I mean, the assumption across Russia is going to be it was Putin, right?
Yeah, I mean, he you know, even if it wasn't him, he might very well, you know, kind of allude to the fact that he took. Yeah, exactly. Now, the other you know, question is, was it the Ukrainians? Zelensky has come out and said, no, it wasn't us. And certainly, you know, that is a very difficult thing to achieve for the Ukrainians, to put sort of a bomb on
within Russia.
I think we can. Yeah, I think we can discount the Ukrainians having done it. But, you know, at this point, it's way too early to start definitively saying what happened.
Phil Ittner, follow his blog over on YouTube with Philip Ittner. Phil, thanks so much.
Happy Independence Day.
Thank you. You too.
Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 18 minutes past the hour. We'll get back to our conversation about the fate and future of the Republican Party. I got a quick story to share with you about Leonard Leo, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. Peter in Lawton, Oklahoma. Hey, Peter, what's on your mind today?
Yes, sir. Last night, just watching the debate, you know, to me it was a rehash of the 1980 Libertarian presidential platform that David Koch ran on.
Yep. At least Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, he was almost word for word. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't pronounce his name, but the man, the alarm bells went off. You know, especially we all know about the Department of Energy and the EPA, but their FCC. I keep a list of it here on my coffee table. 11 government regulatory agencies, even down to SSI and public schools, and last but not least, all taxation. Right. Now, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to have a government without taxation, you know.
Well, that's the point. They want to get rid of the government. They, you know, the libertarian perspective
they want to go back to
and David Koch's
go back to yes.
And David Koch's perspective was the military. We should have a military. We should have a court system. We should have police. Period. That's it. Everything else, even the roads, should be toll roads that some billionaire owns and makes money off of.
Right, a feudal society.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I just wanted to, this is what I get about the Democratic Party, you know, and why haven't they published this or even brought this to light to people? You know, I go to my friends and said, look, I even keep it on my phone. I said, this is what these people plan. They said, well, I've never heard of that. And it seems like somebody in the Democratic Party would publish this stuff and make people aware, you know.
Publish what stuff?
Awareness about what their plans was in 1980, and they're accomplishing today.
You know, I have written about this several times. I should probably do it again this afternoon for tomorrow's piece, because I think you're absolutely right, Peter. I think that what they are trying to do is reinvent feudal society. They're trying to reinvent a society that is hierarchical, that is patriarchal, but also that is you know, basically a small ruling class and a very large class of the working poor. You know, it's fairly clear to me that that's what they're all about.
Well, it's almost like Back to the Future, you know, before Hoover, you know, before FDR came into office, and when starvation was rampant in this country. I mean, in 32, the winter of 31 and 32, one person was starving to death every 7 hours in Flint, Michigan. All the auto workers was laid off.
Yeah.
Even my people here in Oklahoma, my mother even commented as a child she had a bloated belly from hunger. And people just don't. Yeah. People today have no conception of us going back to that type of situation again. And problem is, history repeats itself. If we do not get involved in or something wake the people up, we will go back to that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Who was the author who wrote the Christmas Carol? Charles Dickens, right?
Charles Dickens.
You know, I mean, he wrote about the society that you know, that these right-wing billionaires are trying to create for America. You know, it's basically 19th century England. Peter, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the inspiration. I appreciate it. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Or it looks like Leonard Leo might be in a little bit of trouble here. It turns out that, at least according to the reports that I'm reading, that that Leo has been, you know, he got all this money from this dying billionaire. He got over $1 billion. And that apparently he has been shoveling literally millions of dollars to himself, to his own company, through these nonprofits. And that's arguably against the law. So there's a couple of nonprofit groups that are suing, and they want to know what's going on. Politico wrote about it, suggesting that a total of $43 million flowed to Leo's company over 2 years. And most of it came from this nonprofit, the 85 Fund, which has now apparently reincorporated itself in Texas. It was incorporated, it was using a mail drop, UPS mail postal box in Georgetown. Now it's apparently using one in a strip mall in Texas. But strange stuff, strange times, strange things going on. By the way, an update on Trump getting arrested this afternoon.
The Federal Aviation Administration has issued an alert to pilots that between 6:45 and 9 p.m. tonight Eastern Time in Atlanta, there will be restrictions in the airspace around Atlanta, which means that Trump will be flying in during that time. So it sounds like they're expecting Trump to arrive around 7 and to leave around, before 9. So it looks to me like he's trying to organize his presentation at the Fulton County Jail for primetime television, which, makes perfect sense. I mean, Trump takes everything and turns it into spectacle. Whether it's good news for him, he turns it into spectacle. Bad news for him, he turns it into spectacle. Whatever it may be, Donald Trump turns it into spectacle because that's what he knows how to do, and he's very good at it. He's been doing it his whole entire life. This prosecutor, Fani Willis, I believe, is, and frankly, I think the same is true of Jack Smith, but even more so Fani Willis, at least from what I'm seeing so far, is not somebody who's going to let him off the hook, is not somebody who's going to go easy on him, is not somebody who's going to play his games. And it's going to be interesting to see if the judge in this case, what this judge tells Trump he can and cannot say, and if he's got to stop calling Fani Willis a rigger. Honest to God, he did that on his Nazi-infested website, social media site. Whether this could be the judge that pulls his bail, $200,000 bail. So stay tuned. We'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I will be right back with your thoughts on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stay with us. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote,
jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us. Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. It's 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Thoughts on Ukraine, thoughts on Trump, thoughts on the debate last night, thoughts on Charles Dickens and the neo-feudal society that the Republicans want to return us to or take us to. So what's on your mind? Robert in Modesto, California. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hi. My thoughts are about this possibility of Trump fleeing to Saudi Arabia or anywhere. I don't think he'll go to Russia because he's not useful to Putin anymore, so he'd probably end up like Prigozhin. But
yeah, I think you're right.
But there's some complicating factors in this that make me doubt he'll be able to pull it off. One, first off, the Secret Service, not just the agency, but his specific detail, and actually anybody who's aiding him, they're going to have to give up everything to help him out, possibly risking their own lives in the process. Because I think that he's such a national, international security risk that they'll have no choice but to down that plane. Or even if he gets away with it, he's going to be an international outlaw and prime for an assassination or a kidnapping. So I don't think that, I mean, I wouldn't put past Trump to be stupid enough to try it, but I don't think that's a very appealing.
Well, if you were 77 years old and looking at going to prison, wouldn't you flee the country if that was an option, if you had a private jet?
Yeah, but I'm not talking about him himself. I'm talking about all of his surrounding, his Secret Service detail is going to have to give up their whole lives. His pilots.
I don't think they.
It'd be an ultimate test of where is your loyalty and how much are you willing to give up for.
Well,
this
the Secret
guy?
Service doesn't have to follow him if he doesn't want them to.
Yeah, but do you think they kind of have a notion, that something's off?
I don't know.
They're supposed to be the best of the best at what they do, knowing possibilities like that.
Yeah.
What do they say? Every possible contingency.
Yeah, it presents some really interesting questions. How would the Secret Service handle Donald Trump fleeing the country? Would they stop him, for that matter? I mean, would they enforce the law? Or would they...
And even if they didn't, what about the CIA and all of our allies who have no idea what he can share?
That's true. He's a security risk. If he flees to one of these other countries, he's a huge security risk. All excellent points, Robert. I don't have any easy or glib answers for any of those questions, but I think they're all brilliant questions. Thank you so much for calling and sharing them with us. William in Caledonia, Illinois. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to say right off the bat, I just picked up on your programs here during this last crisis during the last year. I am a guy that's had the knee on my neck in Chicago. I got 2 Chomsky books here on my end table, and that's the kind of stuff I've looked at. But what bothers me the most is this debt crisis. Our children are in so much debt, and they've given it to them as a way of life. And to me, it's nothing different than the chains that we had on slaves.
Our children are not in debt, William.
Our children are not in debt?
No, our children are not in debt. We don't owe anything to anybody. My kids don't owe anything to anybody. It's a canard. This is Pete Peterson's BS. First of all, the debt of the United States is in dollars. The United States issues dollars. We could, if we had to or if we wanted to, we could wipe out the national debt tomorrow, and it would not be inflationary. It's not that much money compared to the number of dollars in circulation around the world. That's the basic premise of modern monetary theory. Secondly, we have always had a national debt. Right now, our national debt is about 120% of GDP. It was 126% of GDP in 1951. And at the end of World War II, we were way above our national debt right now. Our national debt was much greater than it is right now after the Civil War. It was much greater than it is right now after the Revolutionary War. What did Eisenhower do to pay down our national debt? He borrowed even more money in 1953 and 54. He borrowed even more money and built the national highway system, and that so stimulated the economy that the economic activity increased taxable activity, and the taxes paid down the national debt. Yes, we have a large national debt. It's the result of the two Santa Claus theory, of Reagan's two Santa Claus theory, that whenever a Republican is in office, you spend like a drunken sailor, and then when a Democrat comes in, you squeal about the national debt and try to scare the crap out of people. And Reagan took us from an $800 billion national debt to a $2.5 trillion national debt. And then George W. Bush took us to $3.5 trillion, and then George W. Bush added another $7 trillion to our national debt. As Nikki Haley said last night, Donald Trump, before the pandemic, added $8 trillion to our national debt. But it's not a crisis. It's not even remotely a crisis. We can pay this down. We just have to stimulate the economy and raise taxes on billionaires. The average billionaire in America is paying 3.4% income taxes. That's one of the reasons why our national debt is as high as it is. We used to have a top 74% income tax bracket on billionaires. It is now 3.4% with all the loopholes that were drilled into the tax code by Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. All we have to do is reverse that. We can pay it down with no problem without increasing anybody's taxes other than the morbidly rich. So, William, take a deep breath.
Hey.
Yeah.
I've been taking the deep breath because I understand everything you're telling me. Back when, let's say, Chomsky, we understood that our taxes, 264 days of our working taxes went just to pay the interest on the debt. And now today I never hear that equation again.
Yeah, well, it's not true. I mean, you know, the interest on the national debt is now that interest rates are so high, it's probably going to be this year. It's probably going to be around $800 billion, $900 billion, close to $1 trillion. That, you know, it's just, again, it's not anything that's going to cripple the United States. It's and once again, the national debt was brought to you by the Republicans. Now, who's squealing about the national debt? Republicans. This was a political move by the Reagan administration. The Republican Party got in on this thing. Jude Wanniski floated this in 1977 in the Wall Street Journal. He said Republicans have been seen as the Scrooge, as the Grinch for way too long, because every time Democrats want to spend money to help out average working people, Medicare, Social Security, minimum wage, unions, housing support, food stamps, you name it, the Republicans have been opposed to it. And he said, so people see the Democratic Party as Santa Claus, they see the Republican Party as Scrooge. The Republican Party has to become Santa Claus. The way you do that is with tax cuts. And you become the tax cut Santa Claus. But then as soon as so you spend money like crazy and you cut taxes, this, of course, is going to run up the national debt. So then when a Democratic president comes into office, you squeal about the national debt. Who gave us a balanced budget? Jimmy Carter gave us a balanced budget. Bill Clinton gave us a balanced budget. In fact, Bill Clinton, his last year in office, his budget was in surplus. We actually had a surplus. The Democrats actually went along with this whole Republican plan and said, okay, we'll cut spending and we'll raise taxes, just like you said, Republicans. But then, Republicans come into office and cut taxes and increase spending. They increase spending because they know that it stimulates the economy and gives people the illusion of good times. This is purely political, William, and your children and mine do not owe anybody anything with regard to our government. It will all work out. William, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Barbara in Oakland, California. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
I want to talk about Mike Pence.
Go for it.
And I want to make a point that Mike Pence called several vice presidents before he made that decision.
Yeah, he called Dan Quayle for sure. We know about that one.
Exactly. So why is it that people have forgotten and given him the praise? Well, at least he had a conscience. Mike Pence did not have a conscience at all. He never had a conscience. If he had a conscience, he would not need to call other people, and other people was the one that told him no. Not Mike Pence, not his mind, not conscious, and not concern about this country or the people. That is a strong contempt Mike Pence has, and people need to be reminded of that, need to know that, and need to record that.
Yeah, he had 4 long years of going along with all of Donald Trump's horrible policies that led to 700,000 unnecessary deaths from COVID, the tearing mothers from their children. There's still almost 1,000 children that we have no idea where they've been since the Trump administration was trafficking them into these phony adoption charities that then vanished. And where did the kids go? I think that, frankly, they were sold. And Mike Pence didn't say a word. He could have resigned at any point. He could have repudiated the Trump administration and its policies. He didn't. I completely agree, Barbara. You said it so well. Thank you so much for that. 44 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. I'll be back with more of your thoughts on the other side of this break. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Cheryl in Milwaukee. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind today?
Well, you just about stole my thunder. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I called about Nikki Haley.
Uh-huh.
And something she said, she had this whole area. You did the $8 trillion bit, but described the two Santas.
Really? How? What'd she say?
She called out that about the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that was the $8 trillion. Another part of it was like in the budget that they're currently talking about. Republicans have $7 billion as a personal request, and Democrats only have $2.5 billion.
Okay.
She said that they were out of She called out the Republicans for being out of control on spending when Democrats weren't in. When they were in power, they were out spending, but they didn't fuss about.
Yeah, I thought the highest moment for her last night was when she went after Ramaswamy on Ukraine. I mean, this is what she said. She said, "A win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that Ukraine is the first line of defense of us." And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand, he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is our front line of defense. Putin has said once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you're choosing a murderer over a pro-American country. I thought that was brilliant.
I thought that was, it made me look at her in a whole different way. With especially with the financial stuff and the stuff about Ukraine.
Yeah. You know what's going to be real interesting is maybe a week from now, we'll probably know actually on Monday, how the polling has shifted as a consequence of the debate. But I'm guessing that the big loser last night, the huge loser last night, was Ron DeSantis, because he was way ahead of everybody. He spent millions and millions of dollars. He's been traveling the country. He's gotten all his publicity. Everybody's paying attention to him. And he came off like a robot. He came off like an android of some kind. What did you think, Cheryl?
Well,
of DeSantis?
I didn't see that much of it.
Mm-hmm.
I did see the Nikki Haley and the two things we talked about.
Yeah.
But I was only in and out on it. Yeah. I missed the timing and had to.
Well, DeSantis also, I get it. And DeSantis also got nailed for his 6-week abortion ban in Florida. And, everybody's talking about, well, maybe we can go with 15 weeks and let's have a moderate and in between and all this kind of stuff. The European standard. The European standard is very different than what the Republicans are talking about in the United States. But Cheryl, thank you for the call, and thank you for your thoughts on Nikki Haley. It is coming up, it's 11 minutes before the hour, 49 past. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay with us. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. Climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after
university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Ten minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Beth in North St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Beth, what's on your mind today?
Yeah. Well, I'm real happy to know that Trump is going to be jailed, and I wish, it were for life in the same way that Dr. Nassar got his ass jailed for all the young girls he abused.
Yeah, wouldn't it be a great thing if tonight he shows up at the jail and they just keep him? Excellent point.
Oh, absolutely, it would.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
It's music to my ears.
Yeah, I get it. Beth, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Spot on. Larry in Hyattsville, Maryland. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I was watching last night's debate, and the issue about drug abuse came to forefront. I was thinking, it's interesting. Isn't fentanyl an illegal substance?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's actually
not...
it is a prescription drug. It is used by prescription, but it's illegal to possess it without a prescription.
Yes, and in most cases where people are dying, I guess it is in cases in which it's possessed illegally, right? I would surmise that would be the case.
Yeah, these people. One of the people made a reference to somebody who took one pill of what he thought was a painkiller, Percocet, I think, and it was fentanyl. That means that he bought it illegally. He bought it in the black market. Yeah.
So my thing, or my take on this is that, there was such a clamor about other illegal substances back in the early, mid to late 80s and 90s, and it was known as crack cocaine. And the suggested solution for that was to put, now, I'm not for taking illegal drugs in any way, shape, or form, but I found it interesting in the contrast, the response that's been with regards to the fentanyl cases, as opposed to other instances in which cocaine or other drugs that are used illegally are looked at with a more of a punitive or look more in pejorative. But yet when we come to fentanyl, it's basically we want to treat these people, or nothing is talked about how these people should be busted for using drugs illegally, and then treated like those that were using other substances that were illegal back in the day. And I've just found this entire discussion surrounding fentanyl to be very interesting. And it just dawned on me last night that, hey, isn't this an illegal substance? And if it is, why aren't they meeting this with the same punitive measures or the same, or looking at it in the same pejorative manner that they did with the other drugs that were used illegally?
I have an answer for you, Larry. For a long time, we treated, for example, heroin and marijuana, sadly, as just crimes, period, end of discussion. And then when cocaine came along and crack cocaine and all that kind of stuff, it was like, okay, we're going to clamp down on this too, even though cocaine is used therapeutically. It's used as an anesthetic in surgery and things like that. But what happened with the opioids was because of the Sackler family pushing OxyContin on America, we have literally millions of Americans who got addicted through their doctors. And Republicans are really reluctant, and with good reason. This is mostly a problem of the poor parts of America. I mean, West Virginia has one of the worst problems per capita with drug addiction in the country, and it's because of doctors, right? And so they don't want to go after those people. Basically their white base, and say, you're addicted to, and these people are addicted, but they can't get the drugs anymore because the law changed, and so now they're buying them on the street. So the Republicans have softened their tone. Now they're talking about therapy. If I'm understanding your question, I think that's the thing that shifted the paradigm.
I was actually very subtly trying to suggest that it was basically something due to race, because you had these, as you said, poorer communities and whatnot in the 80s and 90s. The black community or African-American community was largely impacted by crack cocaine, and of course, there were punitive measures taken in that. And mostly suburban, white, or upper middle class communities are being subjected to this fentanyl abuse, and the means and the methods that are used to address it are totally different, and it's somewhat, to me, hypocritical.
I agree. I agree. And I'm not sure we're saying something different from each other. The reason why the Republicans have shifted their policy on this toward treatment and away from punishment is because so many white people, mostly low-income white people in poor states, in red states, have ended up addicted as a result of, the prescription drug crisis, the OxyContin crisis. And those then are many of the people who are trying to buy fentanyl. Thus they're like, we've got to stop it from coming into the country, quack, 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 quack. I think, frankly, the solution is treatment centers. We need
I agree wholeheartedly. I think, unfortunately, we have moved to, talking about shifting paradigms, we moved completely away from taking care of those that are less fortunate in this country to more harsher, punitive, police state, maybe industrial complex with regards to prisons and all of that to get these issues done. And it unfortunately plays into those that make large contributions to the Republican Party.
And the reality, to your point, Larry, is that to a large extent, even with fentanyl, we are still dealing with drug addiction in the black community as a crime, and we're largely dealing with it, or trying to deal with it in the white community as an addiction. And, that's a reality that we have to acknowledge. Republicans won't talk about that either, by the way.
Well, but that same paradigm, and I guess we're talking along the same lines. The same paradigm should have been used for crack cocaine.
I agree. There are treatments for stimulant addiction as well. Larry, thanks for the call. Got to run here. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Bishop William J. Barber. An amazing life and an amazing story. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. I could feel my anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough, if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the Vagina Monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and woman's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks and engage with renewed passion and collective purpose in making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is our old friend, the Bishop Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. He's now a professor in the practice of public theology and public policy, and the founding director at the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at the Yale Divinity School. He's the president and senior lecturer at Repairers of the Breach. He's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and was for 29 years until very recently the pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Theologyandpolicy.yale.edu is the website, and you can tweet or X him at Rev Dr. Barber. Reverend Barber, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we spoke. I hope you're well and things are okay.
Well, actually, I'm doing well. I have a little gallbladder issue and I had some surgery.
Uh-oh.
So I'm actually calling you. I was just about to get discharged in a little bit, but I wanted to keep my appointment with you. I'm so thankful for what you do. And, Tom, I want to invite you. We're going to do a major piece at Yale talking about media and moral issues. And next spring, what are the real moral policy issues of this presidential election year? So you're going to be getting a note from us because I want to have you come up and join some others about how do we break through, some of this madness where we get caught up in cultural wars that are nothing more than distractions, of the real issues that face the nation.
Amen. I'd be honored. And let's speak about that. These so-called culture wars. It seems, my take on this is that much of this is being driven by right-wing and fossil fuel billionaires who basically own the politicians in the Republican Party, and they don't want us to be having a conversation about climate change. They don't want us to be having a conversation about social justice. They don't want us to be having a conversation about the way that corporations continue to fight unionization, fight increase in the minimum wage, fight anything that's good for the average person, and particularly for poor people. And so
That's
instead,
right.
They're trying to get us to fight with each other about African-American history and trans people. What say you?
I say exactly that. Cultural wars are nothing but division and distraction. And we have to not play that game and give them the fight they want. For instance, DeSantis, he goes out and he talks about banning books. Think about how foolish it is to talk about banning books that are on Google that you can get. But more importantly, some people didn't get upset until he talked about taking away a history course. Then, he actually used African Americans to do that down in Florida. What we should be doing, though, is saying, wait a minute, you're a failed governor, and we're not going to chase that issue. I've said before, we should be upset about the fact that he's not done anything to deal with the millions of poor people in his state. He's not done anything to deal with the health care needs in his state. The fact that more people died in his state, even Republicans, because of his backwards approach to the pandemic. He's not really done anything to raise living wage in his state. And we have to force that conversation because what they want is the culture war. They want us fighting trans people, fighting immigrants, fighting over history. That's why they're so giddy over those things. And what we can't do is just have marches about things like that. We have to actually change the conversation. Poverty, Tom, now is the fourth leading cause of death in America.
Wow.
Higher than homicide. It's higher than diabetes. It's higher than respiratory disease. We have a conversation about that. We know 350,000 people died during COVID because of the lack of health care. If we had expanded Medicaid expansion, probably 300,000 or more of those people would have lived. They didn't die from COVID. They died from lack of access. So poverty is a death measurement now. It equals death, and the fourth leading cause of death. And we can't continue to be a country where every night on the news you hear about homicide, you hear about other forms of death, but you don't hear anything about policy death that's being created. And these politicians, they don't want to have that conversation. We must make them have that conversation. That's why I'm pushing in Democrats and others, don't fall into the trap of just chasing the culture war. Flip the script and point out everyone, what's her name, out of South Carolina, failed governor. People say she
Nikki
led.
Haley, yeah.
She didn't lead on pulling the Confederate flag. It was Brittany Newsom that climbed the pole and took the flag down, and then she came along afterwards. But more importantly, let's look at her record on blocking living wages, fighting voting rights, denying health care. We have to, and we got to put a face on these issues. And, that's what Dr. King and others were trying to do in the 60s. Tommy, the March on Washington was not about a person's speech. There were 1,100 cities where people were engaged in protests. There were 3 marches. There was a march in Chicago, then one in Detroit. But the actual agenda for the March on Washington, this is what we need to get back to. It wasn't even the black alone. The first thing they wanted was 75% increase in the living wage. Then the second thing they wanted was all unemployed workers, black, white, or that, to be employed in living wage jobs. Then they wanted full voting rights. They wanted to expand the Labor Standards Act. They wanted to guarantee health care. Too often, we come to these moments and we don't even talk about that. I mean, even on the so-called liberal side, so we talk about the I Have a Dream speech, which really wasn't the title of the speech. The title of the speech was Normalcy Never Again. And John Lewis's speech, John Lewis criticized in his speech the Kennedy administration. He said, even though we are here in Washington, hundreds of thousands of our brothers and sisters, black and white, are poor and will not be helped by the current civil rights legislation as it is. We really need to recognize nostalgia gatherings is not enough. We need to be examining where are we on the agenda that was set 60 years ago, and then force a conversation in the political space about that agenda, which would then mobilize people because, lastly, poor people represent 30% of the electorate in the country and 40% in battleground states. And there's not a state in this country where if 15% to 20% are poor and low-wealth voters who have not voted, but when they did vote, they voted progressive, were to be mobilized, could not change the outcome of the election. And if you ask them why they don't vote, our studies tell us the number one reason: nobody talks to us, nobody even calls our name.
Wow. Yeah. And day after tomorrow, Saturday, August 26th, is the 60th anniversary of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's March on Washington. I see you in so many ways as the heir to his work, the man who's carrying on his work. What, in your mind, is the state of the civil rights and poor people's rights movement in the United States?
Yeah. Well, you're right. 60 years anniversary. The actual anniversary is Monday on the 28th.
Okay.
And we're having what's called She Speaks, Repairs the Breach, the League of Women Voters, Black Voters Matter, and others have come together. It's going to be online, but a massive assembly online because, women didn't get to speak. Rosa Parks didn't speak at the March on Washington. Daisy Bates didn't speak at the March on Washington. These powerful women. And so that was something that we need to correct. So on the actual date, on the 28th, we done an online assembly. Of course, we're encouraging people to go for the mass gathering on Saturday. But what we also are saying is that when we gather, we have to remember, number one, it wasn't Dr. King's march. It was actually A. Philip Randolph's idea that he first started thinking about in the 1930s when he challenged Franklin Delano Roosevelt to do right in public policy coming out of the Great Depression. It was Bayard Rustin, who was gay, who was a tremendous labor organizer, who actually did the organizing. It was 6 organizations that came together. They called them the Big Six. Dr. King had just come out of the Birmingham campaign, and it was successful. But one of the things I want people to remember, Dr. King said something that we ought to hear when we talk about the state of where we are. At the end of it, he said, go back. Go back to Alabama. Go back to Mississippi. In other words, what he was saying is we have to go back and continue to build mass movement from the bottom up, because the March on Washington was not a mass gathering, it was mass protest. It was the protest movement coming to D.C., unified, and then going back and continuing to fight. And that's what we have to do, particularly at these state legislatures. Civil rights and labor rights, we're going to have to focus on these state legislatures. That's why in February of next year, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, my co-chair, Reverend Liz Steele Harris, we just had a conference called Moral Poverty Action Congress. We brought people together from all over the country and in 42 states. We're going to hold simultaneously in February mass gatherings at these state capitals, where inside of these state capitals, you have people fighting living wages, fighting health care, and passing all of these regressive policies. And we're going to bring at least 3,000 to 5,000 people together at every state capital simultaneously and launch a massive push towards November. And then on June 15th of next year, we're going to have a mass Poor People's Low-Wage Workers Assembly moral march on Washington and to the polls, led by impacted people and clergy and others, and then use that to push for a massive vote-out turnout of poor and low-wealth people in targeted states. Because if we don't do this, if we allow these cultural wars to overshadow the real issues, then we are actually helping in the undermining of dealing with the issues that we face. Here we are, talking about the state of civil rights. The Voting Rights Act was gutted in 2013, June 25th, 2013. We've not fixed that. And even Democrats, when they have both houses and the presidents, said they did not fix the Voting Rights Act. Right. Think about that.
This is the Shelby County decision from the Supreme Court.
The Shelby County decision,
yeah.
Right.
We just have 45 seconds, by the way, Dr. Barber.
Okay, and they fixed that. We had the possibility of passing a living wage. 2 Democrats joined 49 Republicans and said no to that. So we cannot, what we have to say is there's work still to be done, a lot of work to be done, and we cannot have merely gatherings to talk about the past. We have to fight in the present.
Yeah, and you are doing that and helping to lead that movement, and I am so grateful for it and for you and for the work that you're doing, and anything I can do to support it, feel free to call on me. I'm more than happy to be there for you. The Bishop, Bishop Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. Thank you so much for dropping by, sir, and speaking with us.
Thank you so much. Join us at Repairs of the Breach. Your listeners, go to www.breachrepairs.org and join us. Sign up so you can know what's going on in the Fusion Mall movement as we face these issues. Forward together, not one step back.
Thank you, sir.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Barber, an amazing man. We'll be back 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, 18 minutes past the hour. Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. Talking about Nikki Haley.
Mm-hmm.
I've been living in South Carolina for 23 and a half years. I was here when Nikki Haley ran for governor, and we learned a lot about her. She went to Clemson University here in South Carolina on an accounting degree. She went back home to Columbia, South Carolina, the state capital, and worked as a bookkeeper for her parents. Her parents are Sikh. Her father wears a turban. You will never ever see him around any kind of Republican convention or anything like that.
Is that because the GOP doesn't want him, or because he's not a Republican?
Because they don't like that visual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
But anyways, so she went to work when she graduated from Clemson as their accountant. She deducted payroll deduction taxes from all of their employees. They ran a clothing store.
Mm-hmm.
She never paid those taxes to the state or federal government.
Whoa. That's a crime. Did she get busted for it?
Yes, it is.
I mean, how do you know this?
She was busted for it. She paid a fine. but it got covered up, and she was still elected governor of South Carolina after that was divulged.
Right, right. That's, you know, in a way, I mean, she's got to have something going for her, because for a woman of color to be elected in a southern state as governor, it seems to me like a really big deal. And I get it. You know, Dr. Barber was just talking about how, you know, terrible her policies were with regard to health care, with regard to poverty, with regard to the minimum wage, with regard to unions and things. And absolutely. But what is it, just charisma? Is it, you know, is she just a talented politician?
I honestly do not get it. And the fact that she brought down the Confederate flag over the state capitol.
Right. Although, as Dr. Barber said, it wasn't her idea. She was basically forced into it.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing, there was an open Senate seat, and she appointed Tim Scott.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that, or I didn't remember that. You're right. Now that I recall. Yeah.
Yes.
And then he ran for re-election and got re-elected, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although he's a corporatist from hell.
Yeah.
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 He's really bad. For the first several years that he was in office, the only thing that he spouted was corporate free tax zones.
Yeah.
Enterprise zones.
Tax-free corporate zones. Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's one of the favorites of the GOP. Michael, thank you. Thanks for the insight and the perspective from South Carolina, from Greenville. I do appreciate it, and thank you for watching us over on YouTube there. Thank you very much.
Love you, Tom. You educate me.
Thank you, Michael. I got to run, but good, I appreciate the call. 22 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back. We were talking about Nikki Haley with Reverend Barber and her, you know, anti-worker policies, her anti-Medicare, Medicaid policies, her anti-civil rights policies. But she did last night. Last night, she took on Ramaswamy, and that was a moment. She said, this is what she said. She said, a win for Russia is a win for China. Apparently what's happened is that the Republicans have concluded that China is the boogeyman du jour, as opposed to Russia, because so many Americans, so many Republicans love Russia because they follow Trump. And Trump loves Russia because, you know, Russian oligarchs have, you know, they bailed him out of his bankruptcies in the 1990s, frankly. So anyhow, she goes on to say, she says, a win for Russia is a win for China. We have to know that Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to hand China, let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. And she goes on to say, Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said that if Russia once takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent a world war. And then she talks about, you know, the Putin killing Prigozhin. She said, this guy is a murderer. You're choosing a murderer over a pro-American country? And then he tries to squeal at her about, well, go back to your corporate boards at Lockheed and Raytheon. And she says, you have no foreign policy experience, and it shows. I would never in a million years vote for Nikki Haley. And most of her policies I find reprehensible, but I was impressed by that moment. And I think that she was a major winner last night. I think the two biggest losers last night, in terms of the people who, in particular, were kind of the front runners in the Republican field, were Tim Scott and the poor, pathetic, you know, I'm going to take on the mouse, right? The governor of Florida. Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, it was tragic. I mean, he even glitched at the very end when he was supposed to do his summary speech. He was like, waiting for the download, waiting for the download. Oh, okay, here we go. It was pretty bizarre. Meanwhile, the Republican debate advertisements were running on pro-Hitler videos. This is amazing. The Republican National Committee cut a deal with Rumble, and Rumble placed ads for the debate on the film Adolf Hitler, The Greatest Story Never Told, and Europa, The Last Battle. Here's a description of the first film, Adolf Hitler, The Greatest Story Ever Told. Quote, since the mid-20th century, the world has only ever heard one side of an incredible story. The story of a boy from an ordinary family whose ambition was to become an artist, but who instead became a drifter. His destiny, however, was not to drift into the awaiting oblivion, but to rise to the greatest heights of power, eventually to become one of the most influential men who ever lived. Right. So here we have a biopic, a biopic, or however you say that. You've got this movie applauding Adolf Hitler, talking about what a great man he was, and that's where the RNC put their ads for the debate. I think if you think about it for just 30 seconds even, that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. I mean, these people, they traffic in these conspiracy theories, they traffic in bigotry, they traffic in racism and white nationalism, they traffic in Putin loving, and now they're trafficking in Nazism. Incredible. It's 27 minutes past the hour. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Actually, I've got two stories. One about Fonnie Willis arresting Trump, or Mark Meadows, and the other about cancer. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, and then pick up your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all, and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology, as you might guess. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%, and how, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at HartmannReport.com. Okay, just a couple of quick news things here and one amazing geeky science story, and then back to your phone calls. First of all, Raffensperger, the Purger-in-Chief, the Secretary of State for the state of Georgia, has been subpoenaed in Georgia to testify at a federal court hearing. This could be a little mini trial. I mean, this is going to get real interesting. He's also going to have to come back to Georgia in December. They also subpoenaed Francis Watson, who was the chief investigator for the Georgia Secretary of State following the 2020 election. This is interesting. This is Jack Smith subpoenaing them. Meanwhile, Fani Willis says she wants a trial on October 23rd of this year of Trump and his 18 co-defendants, that she's ready to go. That's interesting. I doubt it'll happen, but that's an interesting one. Another news factoid here. Donald Trump Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle were outside the debate last night basically crying because Fox News wouldn't let them in, wouldn't let them into the spin room. Because Donald didn't show up, his surrogates couldn't be in the spin room. Ah, poor boy. Another story. Gymnasium Jordan wants to know what Fani Willis knows. This is a long tradition. Devin Nunes was doing this before Jim Jordan, subpoenaing information about investigations into Donald Trump so that they can pass that information along to Donald Trump. He just sent a letter off to, he did this to Alvin Bragg, you'll recall. He just sent a letter off to Fani Willis saying, basically, we want to see your evidence. Right. Meanwhile, a judge has ruled that Fani Willis can arrest Mark Meadows. Now, the story I'm hearing is that Mark Meadows is turning himself in now, or will be shortly, down in Georgia. They just went through this whole thing. There was actually an arrest warrant was issued. Fulton County Senior Assistant District Attorney Daniel McDonald Wakeford and Judge Jones, who was appointed by Obama, said that additionally, the Superior Court of Fulton County has already issued an arrest warrant for the defendant, and the court is not authorized to enjoin such action. In other words, Fani Willis has already got an arrest warrant for you, Mark Meadows, and we're not going to stop it. So Meadows is on his way. All right, finally, an amazing new study out of the Salk Institute and the University of California, San Diego. You've probably seen all the headlines about there's this explosion in colorectal cancers, cancers of the colon, the rectum, the whole lower end of the digestive tract among young people in America. And nobody was really sure exactly what's going on with that. Well, now they think they've figured it out. Dr. Ronald Evans, study author and director of the Salk Institute's Gene Expression Laboratory, said, and I quote, "The balance of microbes in the gut is shaped by diet. And we are discovering how alterations in the gut microbial population, the gut microbiome, can create problems that lead to cancer." They did these studies with mice. They fed them high-fat diets similar to American junk food, fast food diets. And what they found was it modified the bile acids. These modified bile acids affected, this is from, stuff from the liver, affected the production and the gallbladder, affected the production of stem cells in the intestines. When these don't replenish frequently enough, they can cause mutations that encourage cancer cell growth. High-fat diets, they said, change the composition of the microbiome, encouraging the growth of bacteria that boost bile acid production, which creates a vicious cycle of inflammation. Colorectal cancer is up 124% in the youngest age group of adults in America. Not good news. All righty, so all of that out of the way, let's pick up your calls here. Matthew in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hey, Matthew, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
There was a gentleman earlier that you were speaking with, and you all were talking about kind of the opioid epidemic and how that's being dealt with in southern states that haven't expanded Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're one of 11 states that are left that haven't expanded Medicaid. And
Tennessee.
There's Tennessee. There's no excuse for it. The federal government pays, I think, 95% of it.
Yep.
And we obviously have no problem taking money from the federal government if they pay 40% of our budget. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on what it's like to try to recover from something like that. Keep in mind you're talking about something that's 50 times stronger than traditional heroin.
Fentanyl.
Fentanyl that people are coming off of or trying to come off of with no help at all.
Right.
You know, to do something like MAT, which, by the way, in my opinion, is the only way that you're going to get people to recover from this epidemic. It's really a godsend. It's a wonder drug. If it was utilized,
what is MAP? You said?
Yeah, medication-assisted therapy.
Oh, it's like methadone, you mean?
Suboxone is what they use now. It's a lot safer.
Okay.
And it's also coupled with a different drug that prevents you from basically overdosing. If you were to do anything else.
Naltrexone. Matthew, I'm going to have to. There's something funky about your phone. I'm guessing you're calling on a VoIP phone, and somebody else's conversation keeps bleeding through, and you keep breaking up. So I'm going to end the conversation now, but I honor what you said. I have friends who have been heroin addicts, back in the day, and methadone saved their lives. I realize there's, like you said, Suboxone, there's new drugs out that are even better. But I completely agree with you that helping people medically through these addictions and tapering them off rather than forcing them cold turkey is the way to do it. Matthew, thank you for the call. Charles in Baltimore, Maryland. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
I was calling because I was hearing all this stuff with Mike Pence about how he's a hero and all this for doing the right thing.
Yes.
But my understanding is he actually inquired. I think I heard he talked to Dan Quayle.
Yep.
And
he wanted to go along with Trump, right. And he was looking for anybody to back him up, and nobody would. He talked to Michael Ludig, too. And they all told him, you're nuts. Trump is nuts. This is a crazy idea. You can't do this. It's not what the Constitution says. And so he kind of found himself in a box.
Yeah, so I was just saying, we can't give him all that respect because he wanted to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
He just knew he'd go to jail if he did it, so he didn't do it.
Yep, I agree. I completely agree.
And I think that's shameful, But, hey, what can we do, Tom? But, hey, you're a great man, Tom. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Charles. Yeah, I thought it was interesting that none of the Republicans last night had the courage to call him out for that. But your point is well taken. Thank you, Charles. David in Cincinnati, Ohio. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm just thinking about the Democratic Party and how they are almost shooting themselves in the foot like they did in the 26th election. I'm looking at Cornel West, who hasn't gotten over the fact of how he was treated by Larry Summers at Harvard. I understand that, I respect that. But going forward, you need to come into the party. Then I think about Tim Ryan. Here we go again. He lost the Senate race in Ohio, which he should have won, but it was. His strategy and the tactics he used were horrible. It didn't play well. He wanted to be the middle-of-the-road guy. He lost. So what does he do? He goes out and forms a group called the We the People. And it's like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
You got Cornel West doing his thing. You got Tim Ryan doing his thing. And it's like these guys don't realize they're not really representing the party. They're supposed to be for the people, actually for the people. So if anything, you would think that these guys would encourage folk to get out and vote for the Democratic Party, to get behind Biden and Harris, regardless of how you might feel about them, but at least pull it together. But instead, you got these guys, and then you got a number of other little tribal groups out there doing their thing. And hopefully it doesn't hurt. And in my opinion, Jerry Johnson did more damage than Jill Stein. Now, you mentioned her name often, as well you should. But you can't forget about Gary Johnson, because between Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, that hurt Hillary Clinton, even though she hurt herself. Mm-hmm. So I look at this, and the victory is right there for the Democratic Party. The people are behind the Democratic Party and their policies.
I'm with you.
And what they're about. And
by and large.
Why these other guys are doing these other things is a distraction.
It's ego.
They're not going to win.
Come on, David. Let's just call it what it is. It's ego. I figured that out about Jill Stein. I moderated a debate between Jill Stein and Gary Johnson back in 2016. And it was so clear to me that these were people who, knew they had no chance. And they were just, they were just like, I want my moment on the stage, right? I want people to notice me. I want everybody, this was, I believe this is what's motivating many of these third-party candidates. And I can't speak to Tim Ryan. I haven't kept in touch with him.
Look,
I don't know what he's up to, but.
I do.
Okay, I believe you.
Yeah, I do. And he barely won his district.
Yeah.
Because he had kicked off a number of people. And the other thing that hurt him was that during the Democratic primary, he only showed up for the 3 debates. He only showed up for one. And it was a slap in the face to the other candidates, one who was backed by, she was in the Obama administration. And it turned off a lot of blacks in Ohio.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that's it, Tom.
Yeah, I get it, David.
And hey, great show, man.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the report from Cincinnati. I do appreciate it, David. It's hard for me to keep track of all the local politics all around the country, and I really appreciate you filling me in. And great job, thank you. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Mary in Casper, Wyoming. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just want to say something about the man that called earlier about the opioid problem and how people can't, they're struggling to get off of it. And I don't know why it hasn't been made more public. Well, I do, because the FDA is against it. But there is an herb called kratom, Kratom.
Yeah, but Mark Pocan has talked about that on this program several times. His husband is a big advocate for kratom.
Oh, bless his heart. I did not know that.
Yep.
Yeah, people got to realize the FDA hates it because it binds loosely with the opioid receptor, and they think, therefore, it's an opioid. But it does not depress respirations, and it actually is an antagonist for opioids. I did it. I got hooked on oxys. And a friend of mine told me, go down to the health food store, get some kratom. And I did. I walked in. I said, oh, my God, I'm going through withdrawal from opioids. What can you give me? And they gave me kratom. And within 30 minutes of taking it, it got rid of, most of my withdrawal symptoms. It only took me a couple. And it was better at helping my pain. Oxys eventually don't work.
Right.
And it really helps with
so
my
kratom's a painkiller too. Have you ever tried low-dose naltrexone, Mary?
Low-dose naltrexone.
Naltrexone is a drug that, much like kratom, only it's a prescription drug. It's a drug that ties up the opiate receptors in your body. It binds to them, and so if you take it, the main reason that they give it to people is if you take naltrexone and then you take narcotics, the narcotics don't work. You don't get high. And because the receptors are already tied up. But people are experimenting, and the normal dose is like 50 to 100 milligrams. But people are experimenting with, there's websites where, these online doctors that are prescribing 4.5 milligrams, which is super low dose. And they claim that it regulates mood, that it diminishes aches and pains. It's supposed to be good for your immune system, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I can't, please don't take this as medical advice, but there's some amazing claims being made for it.
I did not know this either. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Because, the FDA is trying to ban kratom, and I've been labeled a kratom junkie at the ER here in town. I'm serious.
Oh, no.
They have really twisted conceptions. But I tried to tell them when I went in there, I made the mistake of telling them, being honest, that I take kratom for pain. And they said, oh, my God, well, we've had people come in here going through terrible withdrawals from kratom and da-da-da-da. And I researched it, and I realized that what's happening is they're not getting the GMP certified kratom. They're getting it from vendors that are kind of shady head shops, and they're being adulterated with things like heroin and fentanyl.
Oh,
so that's why people are having withdrawal. They say, all I took was kratom.
Yeah.
So, they've got me marked. I'm serious. They were even going to take I had to be admitted to the hospital. They were going to take my kratom away and lock it up and monitor me for withdrawals.
Wow.
I'm serious.
Wow. Have you tried stopping using it and seeing if you experience withdrawal?
Oh, yeah, you can if you take too much. And so, they're mild. They're not like really, really bad withdrawals. But the key to that is to not take it every day.
I get it. This is the same with opiates. Mary, thank you. Thanks for the information. I appreciate it. That's a fascinating conversation. We'll be right back. 51 minutes past the hour. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am reelected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. It's past the hour. Welcome back. And picking up your calls, Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. This is a story that happened back in late February to early March on Maui that didn't generate much press here, but at the summit of Haleakala, 700 gallons of diesel fuel spilled as a float stuck on the generator for the Maui Space Force surveillance complex at the summit of Haleakala, which is sacred grounds and has rare plant life and animal species found nowhere else.
I remember reading a story about that.
Okay, good. And that area is owned and managed by the University of Hawaii. Now this, I got to thinking of, this is just perhaps Pele, the goddess of fire, got angered and caused for that awful fire that happened. Some people, it may sound like BS, it's like I say, this is just speculating, but
I don't ever discount the supernatural, although I'm not obsessed with it. I'm not a skeptic, so who knows, David? It's entirely possible. You wonder, people who are so completely committed to worshiping one particular god or godlike figure, there were other people who were worshiping Thor and Odin and all these other gods throughout history. What happened to those gods? So who knows?
Well,
I don't have an answer.
Heard?
Go ahead.
Have you heard? Like when people have been on the Big Island, and they'd come back with lava rocks, and they'd have a lot of bad luck and.
That's
such.
Right. Yeah, that's right. You're not supposed to.
Was mad, and they mail them back.
That's right. You're not. There's actually a place in Hawaii where people send back the rocks because of the bad luck. You're absolutely right. I know that story. I've been there. Dave, thanks for the call. I got to run. Hank in Port Townsend, Washington. Hey, Hank, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. I'm calling concerning the talk you had a couple callers ago about the Stein-Johnson candidates who are like tertiary, have no chance. But what puzzles me is they all get to keep their campaign funds if they've set it up properly.
Yeah.
Because the Senate candidate, I remember running against Susan Collins in Maine. walked away with $12 million. She could spend however she wanted.
This happened as a result of a Supreme Court decision that altered the way that super PACs work. So now if you run for office and you have a super PAC, and Donald Trump did this, over $800 million out of the $1.6 billion that Trump raised for his 2020 campaign got rerouted to a corporation that his son runs. You know,
I remember you saying that.
So,
but I think
go ahead.
People were to approach these candidates that might have a few things they like but do not have a chance. I mean, I'm sure Robert Kennedy is raking in hundreds of millions, and he's been a grifter for some time.
Yeah, it is a loophole in our law that, you know, frankly, I think really and truly needs to be changed, Hank, and it's not a good thing the way that this is working. You know, third parties have a role, and an important role, frankly. It's why I moderated that debate between Jill Stein and Gary Johnson. You know, they give you the opportunity to hear different perspectives. They bring out issues that the main parties won't bring out. But, you know, sadly, because we have a two-party system in this country, what's happened is that the left-wing parties are being funded, like the Greens, in large part by Republican donors. And the right-wing parties are being funded by right-wing donors also. It's like the Democrats are not...
Split the Democratic vote. Yeah, you're absolutely
there you
correct.
go. Yeah, it's all about diluting the vote. Hank, thanks for the call. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. Anything Goes Friday. Do we have any guests, Sean, tomorrow? Don't think so. It's just you and me. Great. 3 hours. We'll have a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. What's on your mind? In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active. There's so much we can do, right? Indivisible, MoveOn.org, your local Democratic Party. Get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Stay well.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say hi.